Chapter 6. The sisters, their parents, and Granny Rhoda stood in the huge crowd gathered around a vacant space in the camp, now designated as a cemetery. Mr. Canis stood shoulder to shoulder with Robin Hood and Prince Charming. The three men somberly gazed down at the crude casket Geppetto had built for Briar. Pinocchio had helped carry it to the plot where her body would rest. Red Riding Hood placed a bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered along the camp's walls in Briar's hands. Briar still looked beautiful, as if she were once again the sleeping princess from the storybooks. Uncle Jake stood with Mellow Bob and Buzzflower. The fairy godmother sobbed, while Jake stood still and silent. His love for Briar, though new, was well known throughout the town, and the refugees felt his heartbreak. Daphne was inconsolable. She clung to her mother, weeping. Elvis sat next to her, licking her wet cheeks. Sabrina wanted to be strong for her sister, but choked back her own sobs. "Today is a dark day for us," Prince Charming said as he stepped before the grave. "We have lost one of our own and one of our most precious." Like many of us, Briar Rose came to America aboard the new beginning, searching for a new life. She left the kingdom and a family behind, but she brought with her two fairy godmothers, Mellow Bob and Buzzflower, who have been by her side for nearly 700 years. They have kept Briar safe from wicked witches and from a foolish husband. The crowd chuckled. It was rare for Charming to speak of his relationship with Briar. "Sadly, the reign of terror that has affected all of our lives has taken its first victim. Briar was killed by one of the master's dragons and—" "They have a dragon!" Little Boy Blue cried. The crowd fell into fearful chaos, but Robin Hood begged everyone to remain calm. "They have more than one," Charming said. "Jacob Grimm managed to kill two and chased off a third. There could be even more." Where did they come from?" Morgan Le Fay asked. "I thought the Grimms had all the dragon eggs." "We have those that we were given to look after," Granny said. "But not everyone was willing to part with their enchanted possessions, and my family has never forced them to." Charming raised his hand for the crowd's attention. "We can discuss this issue later. Now I would like to let the people who knew Briar Rose the best speak about her," Charming said. "Starting with myself. I found Briar's castle centuries ago, wrapped in a thorn hedge. My youthful zeal for exploration and treasure drove me to cut through it, but I didn't know the actual treasure I would find. Briar was one of the most beautiful women I had ever met. But her truest beauty was internal. She was, above all, kind and patient, thoughtful and encouraging. She could be smart, funny, and wise. I was not the husband I should have been to her. My heart was somewhere else, and she knew it even better than I did. She set me free. She never held a grudge. She was gracious about the end of our marriage and moved on to a new, happy life. I was not a good man when I met her, but I am all the better for having known her. I count myself as one of the luckiest people in the world for having shared a life with her. I will miss you, Briar." Charming welled up but pulled himself together. "Now I'd like to ask Mellow Bob and Buzzflower to speak." The fairy godmothers stepped forward and lifted their sad faces to the crowd. Briar was a brave woman. She was also strong, stubborn, and opinionated, but brave, Mellow Bob said, holding back tears. She faced many obstacles in her life, evil witches, monsters, heartbreak, all with determination and a smile. And somehow, she always came out on top, Buzzflower said. Her death was tragic, but it comes as no surprise to us that she died for someone she truly loved. I will miss her humor, her strong sense of right and wrong, and her companionship. Though my sister and I helped raise her, I feel we learned more from her than she ever learned from us. Goodbye, my sweet Rose. She blew a kiss to the casket. Jacob, Charming called. Uncle Jake stepped forward. He turned to the Everafters as if about to say something about the woman he loved. But instead, he reached into his pocket and took out the box that held her engagement ring. He slipped the ring onto Briar Rose's finger, leaned over, and kissed her on the lips. Then, Jake rejoined the crowd. Charming stepped forward once more. Death has come to our door. Briar was our first casualty. I know what you are thinking. Casualty is a word people use for death in the midst of war. And we are at war, even if you have chosen not to fight with us. The battle is at our door, and if we stand idly by, we may as well dig our own graves. Mr. Seven appeared with a shovel on his shoulder. Who wants to dig their own grave? The prince asked. The crowd eyed the shovel as if it were a scorpion preparing to strike. These are your choices. Join Sleeping Beauty or fight. Sabrina scanned the crowd. There she saw so many familiar faces. Snow White, Friar Tuck, Puss in Boots, Morgan Le Fay, Old King Cole, Frau Pfefferkuchenhaus, Rip Van Winkle, Sawhorse, the Scarecrow, the Pied Piper and his son Wendell, Lancelot, Cinderella and her husband Tom, and Jack Pumpkinhead. There were Munchkins and Lilliputians, Yahoos and Shoe Elves. There were Brutus creatures like the blacksmith, troll, and a cyclops, but also delicate beauties like Little Bo Peep and her flock of sheep. There were also many Everafters Sabrina didn't know and had never seen before that day. Why should we trust you, Charming? Ichabod Crane asked from the middle of the crowd. Weren't you yourself a member of the Scarlet Hand? How do we know this isn't some trap? A duckling quacked. Let me explain, Charming said fiercely. The crowd erupted into shouts and arguments, but the noise stopped when Mr. Canis stepped forward. Charming's words are true, but since you needed to hear it from someone else, hear it from me. The war is coming. If we fight, many of us will die. If we don't, then all of us will die. We have a chance to beat them back, but we have to prepare this camp. Uncle Jake stepped forward. I will fight. Henry gasped. Jake, no! Thank you, Jacob, Charming said, then turned back to the crowd. Is there no one else? A human has stepped forward to fight for you. A human. Mellow Bob and Buzzflower joined him. We will fight. Mr. Seven raised the shovel. I will fight. Morgan Le Fay stepped up next to Seven and looked down at him. I will fight too. The little man smiled and gave her hand a squeeze. Anyone else? Charming called. Papa, Mama, and Baby Bear roared. Puss in Boots joined the group. Beauty and her beastly daughter Natalie were next. Then former deputies Mr. Borman and Mr. Swinehart. The Bridge Troll and Rip Van Winkle stepped forward, followed by the Munchkins, then the Winkies, then the Gillikins, the Lilliputians, the Mouse King and his royal subjects, several Huihims, a huge contingent of knights, princes, princesses, and witches, and finally Jack Pumpkinhead all joined. I will fight, they said in unison. The last refugee was Ichabod Crane, who frowned before reluctantly stepping forward himself. Fine, but if I see that one of those Scarlet Hand thugs is missing a head, I'm deserting. The crowd roared and shook their fists in the air. Charming turned to his team. Mr. Seven, Robin Hood, Snow White, and Mr. Canis nodded in approval, and he nodded back. Then he removed his purple suit jacket and tossed it aside. He took the shovel from Seven and began to dig Briar's grave. Uncle Jake stopped him and held out his hand. Charming nodded respectfully, passed Jake the shovel, and stepped aside. Overhead, rain clouds opened, soaking the camp. The refugees drifted away, but Sabrina and her family stayed to watch Jake dig. When the hole was deep enough, he gave his loved one final kiss, then closed the casket's heavy lid. Charming and Henry helped Jake lower the box into the grave and stood by as he filled the hole with dirt. When Briar was buried, Mallow Bob and Buzzflower planted a single seed on top of the plot. Moments later, fed by rainwater and magic, a rose bush sprouted and grew in its spot. The next morning, Camp Charming became Fort Charming. Sabrina was surrounded by a flurry of fight training, forging, and construction. Mr. Borman and Mr. Swinehart directed the work, and with the help of some witches and wizards, the fort soon doubled in size. Teams of volunteers built lookout towers, fortifying them with cannons, while others built a catapult big enough to hurl a pickup truck over the walls. Everyone volunteered for Snow White's army, and she trained them in hand-to-hand combat. Under her command, Everafters of all shapes and sizes ran drills, rappelled down the tall fort walls, and, Snow's favorite, dropped at a moment's notice for muscle-straining push-ups. It was very strange to see the ancient Frau Pfefferkuchenhaus crawling on her belly beneath barbed wire. Henry continued to search for a way out of the town, and Veronica continued to try to convince him to stay. As they bickered, the girls were left to their own devices. They searched for some way to be useful. They came across Pinocchio sitting under an oak tree and carving a dozen small wooden heads with a sharp knife. His work was highly detailed, and his mastery of the blade was incredible. "You're making puppets," Daphne said, picking up one of the heads and examining it. "They are called marionettes," Pinocchio said. "What's the difference?" Daphne asked. "A marionette is a wooden figure with limbs attached to strings, and someone manipulates the strings to make it move," Sabrina explained. "And that's not a puppet?" Daphne asked. Pinocchio bristled at the little girl's confusion. "No, a puppet has someone's hand up its bum. A marionette can walk, dance, and perform in any way its master desires." "And now you're making them just like your father," Sabrina said, continuing to admire his work. Pinocchio nodded. "It's a skill I've been working on for some time. The secret is to use the right wood. If it's too hard, it's impossible to carve, but if it's too soft, then the whole piece can fall apart in your hands. It took me forever to find the right wood, but now I have it, I carry it with me." "Must get heavy," Sabrina said, noticing the huge bag the boy had brought with him to the camp. "A tad," the boy said, as if slightly annoyed, and changed the subject. "My condolences for your loss." Sabrina thanked him and blinked back tears. She was the best. She seems to have been quite an exceptional woman and an asset to the Everafter community. Sabrina nodded, though she was unnerved by Pinocchio's manner of speaking. She couldn't get used to his sophisticated vocabulary. Before she could respond, "That seems to be the end of this video. I'll send more later. Goodbye."